I've been in the military for over a decade now, but nothing in my training prepared me for what I encountered that night at Fort McCoy. It was 2014, and I'd recently made the transition from enlisted Marine to National Guard officer through the ROC program. The change was a big step up, but I felt ready for it. After all, I'd been through some of the toughest training the Corps had to offer. Little did I know, the Wisconsin woods had something in store for me that would make my time in the Marines look like a walk in the park. It was a crisp autumn night, and our unit was gearing up for a nighttime land navigation exercise. As I adjusted my gear and double-checked my compass, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement. Land nav was my forte, a skill I'd honed to near perfection during my time in the Corps. The other officers joked that I could find my way out of a paper bag in pitch darkness, and I wasn't about to prove them wrong tonight. The exercise area stretched out before us, a vast expanse of dense woodland punctuated by the occasional clearing. As our platoon sergeant briefed us on the night's objectives, I took in the surroundings. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches reaching up towards a sky dominated by a full moon. It was the kind of night that would have been perfect for stargazing, if we weren't about to plunge into the depths of the forest. As the briefing wrapped up, I couldn't help but notice the wind picking up. Clouds scudded across the moon's face, creating an eerie dance of light and shadow across the landscape. It was beautiful in its way, but also unsettling. Little did I know, those shifting patterns of darkness would soon become a lot more than just an atmospheric quirk. We were each given our coordinates and sent off one by one. The solitary nature of these exercises always struck me as both challenging and meditative. It was just you, your wits, and the wilderness. No backup, no chatter, just the sound of your own footsteps and the rustle of leaves in the wind. As I set off into the trees, compass in hand, I felt that familiar rush of confidence. This was my element. The first few hours went by smoothly. I navigated from point to point with ease, marking off my objectives faster than I'd anticipated. The terrain was challenging. Hills that left me breathing hard, thick brush that caught at my uniform. But nothing I couldn't handle. The paved road that ran along one side of the training area was a comforting presence, a reminder of civilization not too far away. As I ticked off my penultimate navigation point, I realized I was well ahead of schedule. The moon had climbed high in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. I decided to take a short break, finding a spot on a nearby hillside to catch my breath and enjoy the view. It was peaceful up there, looking out over the silvery landscape. In hindsight, I wish I'd just pushed on to the final point. Maybe things would have turned out differently. But you can't change the past, no matter how much you might want to. I must have sat there for about 15 minutes, just taking in the night air and the sounds of the forest. It was then that I first noticed something odd. The usual nighttime noises, the chirp of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, had gone quiet. At the time, I brushed it off. Animals go quiet for all sorts of reasons, right? I got to my feet, brushed off my uniform, and started making my way back down the hill. That's when things started to get weird. As I reached the bottom of the hill and entered a small clearing, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. You know that feeling when you're being watched. It was like that, but 100 times more intense. I scanned the area, my eyes landing on a dead tree at the far side of the clearing. And there, perched on one of its bare branches, was something that shouldn't have been there. Something that shouldn't have existed at all. In that moment, I realized that this night was about to become a lot more than just a routine training exercise. It was about to become a fight for survival against something I couldn't begin to understand. The clearing suddenly felt exposed, like a stage under a spotlight. There on that dead tree was a sight that defied explanation. At first glance, it looked almost human, but wrong in every way that mattered. Its body was pale, almost luminescent in the moonlight, and so emaciated that I could see the outline of every bone. But it was the arms that really got me. They were impossibly long, like some twisted caricature of human proportions. And its face. God, that face. Pinched and gaunt, with eyes that reflected the moonlight like a cat's. I'd seen some strange things in my military career, but nothing could have prepared me for this. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other. Me, frozen in shock and disbelief. And it, well, I couldn't begin to guess what was going through its mind, if it even had one. The wind picked up, sending clouds scudding across the moon. And for a moment, the clearing was plunged into darkness. When the light returned, the creature was moving. It came down that tree faster than anything I've ever seen. One moment it was perched on a branch. The next it was on the ground, its unnaturally long limbs propelling it forward on all fours. The sight was so bizarre, so utterly wrong, that for a crucial second I couldn't move. It was like my brain was short-circuiting, unable to process what my eyes were seeing. That second of paralysis nearly cost me everything. As the creature scuttled towards me with inhuman speed, something deep in my hindbrain finally kicked in. Run. The word echoed through my mind like a klaxon, and suddenly I was moving, turning on my heel and bolting for the tree line behind me. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I needed to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and snagging on my uniform. In my panic, all thoughts of stealth or proper movement techniques went out the window. I was running on pure adrenaline, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The sound of my own ragged breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots seemed deafening in the otherwise silent forest. As I ran, a part of my mind, the part that had been trained to assess and react to threats, started to kick in. I realized I hadn't heard any sound of pursuit. No crashing through the undergrowth behind me, no inhuman screeches, just the sound of my own desperate flight. For a moment, I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd imagined the whole thing. That the stress of the exercise, combined with the eerie play of moonlight and shadow, had caused some sort of hallucination. But then I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. To my left, moving parallel to my path, was a pale blur weaving through the trees. My heart, already racing, somehow found a way to beat even faster. The thing was keeping pace with me, but it wasn't directly chasing me. It was like it was hurting me, guiding my panicked flight in a specific direction. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through me. This wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. There was intelligence behind its actions, a calculated strategy that made it all the more terrifying. I changed direction, veering sharply to the right. If it wanted me to go left, I was damn well going to go right. As I altered my course, the wind picked up again, sending a fresh wave of clouds across the moon. The forest plunged into near-total darkness, and I stumbled, my foot catching on an exposed root. I went down hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. For a terrifying moment, I lay there gasping, certain that at any second I'd feel those long, pale fingers grabbing at me. But the attack never came. As I pushed myself up, spitting out dirt and leaves, the clouds parted again. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows all around me. And there, not 20 feet away, I saw it again. The creature was clinging to the side of a massive oak tree, its head cocked to one side as it watched me. Those reflective eyes bored into me, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. It was toying with me, I realized. This wasn't just a chase, it was a game. And I was nothing but prey. As I lay there on the forest floor, my mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of the situation. Years of military training screamed at me to get up, to keep moving. But a primal part of my brain wanted nothing more than to curl up and hope this nightmare would pass. The creature's eyes never left me, its gaze burning into my soul. I knew I had to do something, and fast. Slowly, I pushed myself to my feet, never breaking eye contact with the thing. My hand instinctively went to my hip, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. This was just supposed to be a navigation exercise, for crying out loud. We weren't armed for combat, let alone whatever the hell this was. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was on my own, with nothing but my wits to rely on. As I stood there, locked in this bizarre standoff, I forced myself to think, what would my drill instructors say if they could see me now? Assess the situation, soldier. Use your training. The words echoed in my head, a mantra from a world that suddenly seemed very far away. But they were right. I needed to stay calm, to think rationally. I took a deep breath, trying to slow my racing heart. Okay, what did I know? The creature was fast, incredibly so. It could climb with ease, giving it a major advantage in this forested terrain. But it hadn't attacked me outright. It was playing some sort of game, hurting me. That meant it was intelligent, which was both terrifying and potentially useful. If it could think, maybe it could be outsmarted. The wind picked up again, howling through the trees. Clouds raced across the sky, plunging the forest into alternating periods of moonlight and shadow. Each time the light returned, I half expected the creature to be gone, or worse, right in front of me. But it remained on its perch, watching, waiting. The constant shift between light and dark was disorienting, playing tricks on my eyes. More than once, I thought I saw movement in my peripheral vision, only to turn and find nothing there. I knew I couldn't stay put. Sooner or later, the creature would make its move, and I didn't want to be caught flat-footed when it did. Slowly, deliberately, I began to back away. My eyes darted between the creature and the ground at my feet, trying to avoid any more stumbles. As I moved, my mind raced, trying to remember the layout of the training area. The paved road, I realized. If I could make it there, I'd have a clear path back to base. No more stumbling through underbrush, no more trees for this thing to use to its advantage. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The terrain was working against me. The hills and thick brush that had been a welcome challenge during the exercise now felt like deadly obstacles. As I picked my way through the forest, every snapping twig and rustling leaf sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. The creature had vanished from its perch on the tree, and its absence was almost worse than seeing it. At least before, I knew where it was. I pushed on, my legs burning from the exertion. The hills seemed steeper than I remembered, each one leaving me gasping for breath at the top. The brush tore at my uniform, thorns scratching my exposed skin. But I didn't dare slow down. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of pale movement just at the edge of my vision. The creature was still out there, still following, still hurting me. But to where? And why? As I crested another hill, the wind suddenly died down. The silence that fell over the forest was eerie, broken only by the sound of my own labored breathing. I paused for a moment, straining my ears for any sign of pursuit. Nothing. The quiet was oppressive, like the whole forest was holding its breath. And then, carried on the faintest whisper of a breeze, I heard it. A sound so soft I might have imagined it, but one that chilled me to my core. It was a laugh. Not human, not animal, but something in between. And it was coming from right behind me. That laugh, it was the final straw. Any remaining shred of composure I had left evaporated in an instant. I bolted, no longer caring about stealth or strategy. My feet pounded against the forest floor as I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning with each desperate breath. I had no idea if I was even going in the right direction anymore. All I knew was that I had to get away from that sound, that mocking, inhuman laughter that seemed to echo through the trees. As I ran, the terrain began to change. The thick underbrush thinned out, and I realized with a surge of hope that I was nearing the edge of the forest. The paved road couldn't be far now. Just a little further, I told myself. Just a little more. And then suddenly, I burst out of the tree line. The asphalt of the road gleamed dully in the moonlight, a ribbon of relative safety cutting through the wilderness. For a moment, I just stood there, hands on my knees, gulping down air. The rational part of my brain knew I wasn't safe yet, that I needed to keep moving. But after the terror of the forest, the open road felt like a sanctuary. As my breathing began to slow, I straightened up and looked around. The road stretched out in both directions, disappearing into the darkness. I tried to orient myself, to figure out which way led back to base. That's when I made my final mistake of the night. I looked back at the forest I'd just escaped. There, high up in a tree at the forest's edge, I saw it. The creature's face, its eyes locked on me, just as they had been in the clearing. But this time, something was different. Its mouth, which before had been a thin, expressionless line, was now curved into what I can only describe as a grin. It was a horrible sight, made all the more terrifying by how human it looked. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't just chasing me. It was enjoying this. That grin broke something inside me. With a strangled cry, I turned and sprinted down the road, no longer caring which direction I was going as long as it was away from those eyes. That face. The sound of my boots on the asphalt echoed in the night, a frantic rhythm matching the pounding of my heart. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning as I fled, driven by a fear so primal it bypassed all rational thought. It wasn't until I saw the lights of the base in the distance that I began to slow down. As the familiar outlines of buildings came into view, the adrenaline that had been fueling me began to ebb, leaving me shaky and exhausted. I stumbled into the camp, my uniform torn and dirty, leaves and twigs stuck in my hair. A few of my fellow officers looked up as I approached, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. I must have been quite a sight. The sergeant, a gruff man I'd always respected, walked over to me, his brow furrowed. "Everything okay, Lieutenant?" he asked, his voice gruff but tinged with worry. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? That I'd been chased through the woods by some kind of monster. That I'd failed to complete the exercise because I was running for my life from something that shouldn't exist. The absurdity of it all hit me then, and I nearly laughed out loud. Instead, I just nodded, forcing myself to take deep breaths. Got a bit turned around in the dark. I managed to say, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. Took a wrong turn and had to backtrack. The sergeant looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face. I could tell he didn't quite believe me, but he nodded anyway. As I made my way to my tent, my mind raced. Should I report what had happened? Would anyone even believe me? The potential consequences loomed large in my mind. Best case scenario, they'd think I was pulling their leg. Worst case, they'd question my fitness for duty. My career, everything I'd worked for, could go up in smoke because of one inexplicable night in the woods. In the end, I decided to keep quiet. I told myself it was the rational choice, the smart choice. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was scared, not just of not being believed, but of having to relive that terror, to put it into words and make it real. So I said nothing, going through the motions of cleaning up and preparing for the next day's exercises, as if nothing had happened. But as I lay in my bunk that night, sleep eluding me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the world had changed. Or maybe it was me who had changed. The safe, orderly military life I'd known seemed like a thin veneer now, barely concealing a reality far stranger and more terrifying than I'd ever imagined. As I stared up at the canvas of my tent, I knew one thing for certain. The memory of those eyes watching me from the tree would haunt me for years to come. A chilling reminder that sometimes the unexplainable finds us when we least expect it. And when it does, all our training, all our preparation might not be enough to save us.